Get this show on the road. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Luke O'Halloran. I'm part of the steering committee here at Newton for Everyone. Thanks for coming to another of our series of educational events. Stand over here by the mic. Welcome to everybody here in the room. We think we'll be at about 100 people between here and folks on the Zoom. As you all probably know, we here at Newton for Everyone are a pro-housing organization advocating for diverse housing opportunities so that people of all walks of life, means, backgrounds, and abilities can live here in Newton. We're here tonight to talk about zoning, how it works, when it works well, when it sometimes doesn't work well, and some things we can do as a community to get the outcomes that we want more of the time in our city. So we have some great presenters here who actually worked on the zoning that was recently implemented in a lot of the city, who will share their perspective on that, and then we'll have questions afterwards. So yeah, the question to sort of talk about tonight is sort of why does building a home in Newton require so many years typically of special permits, committee hearings, and appeals? And what does this exhaustive and exhausting process have to do with the fact that so much of the development we see in Newton are these sort of like large single-family McMansions being built after tearing down existing structures that people in the community have grown attached to and they like. We're sort of seeing a lot of energy and effort expended, and the outcomes are often not outcomes that people are happy about. And the answer to this question lies in the zoning regulations and the permitting process itself. So that process has grown over time and sort of it accreted many different rules, many that came in with good intentions to give both community members in Newton and the City Council a voice in planning and design decision. But the sort of aggregation and accretion of all of those rules and steps and processes, each individual one may have seemed like a good idea at the time or in isolation, but when you sort of add them all up together, you've got a whole hay bale falling down on that camel's back, and we're not getting good outcomes. Things are taking too long. And I think the time is something that's hard sometimes to think about in terms of what the impact is. I think it's easy to say, well, let's slow down, let's figure this out. The buildings will be there for a long time. That's a reasonable perspective to have. I think another perspective, something I was thinking about earlier this week, I saw an email that the 73 units that will be available at the Newton Crossing development right here at Washington and Dunstan are opening up to a lottery. And so those units are going to be coming available into I think some in the fall, winter, and spring into next year. And I was thinking about the 73 families, maybe a small family of maybe a single person or a couple, and maybe some families with kids moving into those units, how much it would have meant to them if that email had come out a year ago, or 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. That's years of people being able to enjoy an affordable home in a wonderful community with good schools, great access to Trader Joe's, and I live very close to that. So great amenities, it's a great neighborhood. I would have loved to have those people be my neighbors for longer. But we had that development had to go through the special permit process. It had to go through a lawsuit, and those people's access to their homes, to say nothing of the many more units that are market rate, people who just should have just as much of a right to come and live in our city, that was delayed. And you can imagine this room being almost, if all the people that live in those 73 units came, we'd overflow the room. And I think it's easy when you're designing those processes, or you're maybe sitting in a community meeting, to think about and let's be real, it's the same couple dozen of us that go to those meetings to give our feedback, the people in support, the people against, and all that. But the people who are going to live in the units don't get to be there. And I think you have to imagine those people being in the room and saying, I need a place to live. Especially the subsidized affordable units, which we have as part of our inclusionary zoning. People can need those units immediately. I have some experience with that. People I know and have met here in Newton, people from outside of Newton. And so that's, I think, one aspect of the time that can can be hard to consider when you're thinking about all the rules and the process. This process also sort of discourages the sort of smaller scale, more attainable, more affordable market rate housing that so many people say they want. We have done a lot of work here in Newton to address this problem. Though we have adopted and as of right form-based zoning for our village centers, as well as sort of missing middle and adaptive reuse projects around those village centers. But there still are questions about how those new rules are doing, whether we're succeeding in expanding the choices of housing and preserving the visual character of our neighborhoods, which we're so attached to. So tonight we're going to do a deep dive into the current zoning, permitting and zoning processes and the new zoning approaches that have been designed and implemented to improve it. To help explain this, we have some urban designers and planners from UTIL who will discuss their collaboration with the planning and zoning staff on the work they've done here in Newton, and as well as some work they've done in other parts of New England. And after their presentation, like I said before, we'll have a Q&A. So speaking tonight, we'll have Tim Love, who's the founding principal of UTIL and leads the firm's urban planning and design practice. He is a lecturer and senior fellow in real estate and urban planning at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. We have Lauren Rapport, who designs at the intersection of architecture, infrastructure, and urbanism. She's been at UTL since 2021 and worked personally on the Village Center zoning project. And Camille Wimpy joined UTL in 2025 and has a master's in architecture from Northeastern, where her master's thesis, which I am going to read tonight because it sounds cool, after I get home. I'm not going to look at my phone during the presentation. That would be rude. It explored rethinking the rights of renters in the context of Boston, envisioning a world where they could have the power to individually or collectively repair or change the buildings they occupy. So those are our wonderful guests. They're going to come up and talk, and we'll have questions afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Everyone see? How many, I see some familiar faces. How many of you came to one of the 1,000 meetings we had about the Village Center zoning? Well, I'm glad you're back. I miss it too. It's a kind of, I feel like Billy Joel at, is that one concert a year or something? But all kidding aside, and this is going to be the punchline a little bit, because of the zoning framework we came up with for the particular circumstances of the Newton Village Centers, we've taken that zoning framework as a way to structure zoning, and it's become very popular in New England. So it was designed in Newton, and we've taken it on the road, so we'll talk about that too. Okay, I think first of all, backing way up, there are essentially three general ways to framing a zoning code. One is the floor area ratio model, which Newton has or had in some places. Floor area ratio is just the size of the lot times a number. And so a 4 FAR means that if the lot is 10,000 square feet, you can build a building that's 40,000 square feet. FAR doesn't tell you what the building shape is or how far it is from the lot lines. All kinds of other dimensional standards are required for an FAR zoning, but the number a developer has in their head is the FAR, because they can very quickly calculate how big the building can be. And city planners love it too, because you can calculate stuff like you can aggregate those numbers and worry about aggregate things that cities worry about. The problem with FAR, all in its naked self, is it privileges small units. Because if you're a residential developer and there's a fixed FAR, you can make more money if you have 1 million little studio units. That's FAR. I mean, this is just a way to think about it. Option 2, dwelling units per acre. Very popular in many of the suburbs. Municipalities like it, towns, because you can sort of figure out how many school kids are coming. And also, dwelling units is a good way to understand infrastructure capacity because water and sewer capacity is based on dwelling units. So for the quick math of the cost of infrastructure in schools, it's very popular. The problem with dwelling units per acre is it favors big units, McMansions. And so in a dwelling unit per acre regime, I like the word, use the word regimes, it sounds kind of evil. You favor McMansions. One dwelling unit per acre, well, that's going to be a 6,000 square foot dwelling unit, as long as we meet the setbacks XYZ. The new kid on the block is form-based zoning. We helped the city of Somerville, Massachusetts, come up with the first comprehensive form-based zoning code in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I don't know, like 8 years ago plus. True ideologically pure form-based zoning has millions of design rules. Very particular about percentage of fenestration and how big a cornice is, and it gets into the nitty-gritty. And the challenge with a form-based code is that it's very difficult for municipalities to review submissions because there's so many things to check. And it's something the city of Somerville has realized over the last 5-7 years, and they're rethinking some aspects of their code, actually. The other issue a little bit with the form-based format that was out of the box and has been popular the last 15 years is that it makes you pick a specific building type first, and then those building types can be deployed in different places. But contemporary development doesn't think that way. And so in the heat of the moment with the village center zoning, we came up with a brand new format that we made up conceptually from scratch, which we call form-based light, with an LITE, like it's Diet Coke or something. And it's a much simpler form-based code that's only based on the basics of 3 things. For different districts, there's a maximum building footprint measured in square footage. And so imagine, you know, in a more residential area, the footprint might be the size of the house you want. And then the number of stories, although everybody needs to have the height too, but we tried to at the beginning just push number of stories because developers never want to build a taller floor than they have to. So I don't know why we're worried about the absolute height. If it's 3 stories, maybe the buildings would be nicer if they had taller ceilings. So it's a pet peeve of mine, but fine, we'll have the height too. And then in some districts, we also agree that the building should have pitched roofs, but that pitched roof area should be occupiable. Because that's how you motivate the market to perform. And so we developed in Newton an idea that, and we called it a half story. Not actually half, like half the square footage of the allowable footprint, but the half story is either a pitched roof that's no steeper than a proportion of 14 and 12, a nice gable proportion. You can see the graphic here. Or you can set back a penthouse 10 feet. We recommended 7 feet because that allows for a nice 6-foot deep terrace, but the council thought they would be tough and at the last minute changed the Newton code from 7 feet to 10 feet, which was kind of dumb because it's a little bit harder. It's more expensive to frame a little bit. So a little backstory there. We're going to try to air the things we don't like about the code tonight, and this coalition is going to fix a few minor things. But this is the diagram in the code itself. In the lower districts where the footprint is smaller, you can only pick the pitch roof. But in VC2 and VC3, I think, is this true, Lauren? Lauren is my attorney tonight, who worked out all the detail. So those are does that make sense? If you think about the little Monopoly plastic thing, that green thing, footprint, number of stories, pitch roof, it's not that complicated, form-based light. Now, what's cool about this is if you fix a footprint, the way you incentivize the real estate market to do the expensive things is you let them do it outside of the footprint. Think about Mr. Potato Head. So you can put bays on for free. There's limitations. That's free square footage. So suddenly a developer is motivated to put bays on a building instead of it saying it's too expensive. You can put balconies and you can put porches outside of the footprint too. So all the stuff that we like that makes buildings bumpy and not super smooth and flat is incentivized by the footprint rule. And then these are, I'm giving you the highlights of the things we really care about, and then where the parking goes. I'll tell a story later, there's not time, but the new Cambridge zoning ordinance is too permissive about parking. And so developers are taking full advantage of their very permissive zoning, and then developers are doing condo projects and putting parking in the front to maximize the building mass on the rest of the site. And so we were very careful about that. So those are the rules. Nothing more or less complicated than that. But then we do have, I told you the highlights, but I've got all of the dimensional standards here that are baked into the zoning, because the important thing is if you get form-based zoning light right, you don't need design guidelines, because it's all baked into the code, because you can have anything in the code that's non-discretionary. So you can't say in the code it must feel like Newtonville, that wouldn't pass, but you can give very specific maximums and minimums, and then that can be in the code. And the confusion between design guidelines and what's in the zoning and how much of each should be in both, I think is part of the confusion of zoning in Massachusetts. Most Massachusetts communities went the Newton special permit route and then freaked out and then did design guidelines that are discretionary, which sort of is a reference for the discretionary decision makers and just makes the process even go on even longer. I'm editorializing here. So those of you that came to all the ZAP meetings over 3 years know that we produced drawings like this. This is a place that many of you probably know on Walnut Street in Newtonville. And this is the most that you can do following our zoning. It's in a zone where you can build to 4.5 stories. The half story is on the roof. This developer was very clever. They used a combo platter of the penthouse and the pitched roof. Totally cool. You don't have to pick either one. You can go crazy and do a little penthouse thing on the corner and then a pitched roof. They're following our dormer guidelines. Those are nice units up there. And then, oh no, there's a building across the street that's also following the zoning. You see that? A different architect with a different style. They're going all penthouse on the top, but that's following the zoning. And then the other things that we care about, which is getting the ground floor right. We've got all of the design standards in the zoning here. You can't read it. We'll send you the presentation. And then we're showing you all of the good things the developer had to do following our zoning. And you'll see that it has to do with the height and the step back, but most of the other numbers are down around the ground floor to get that right, where the public realm meets private investment. So that's the zoning code. So I'm going to turn it over to Camille to, the next question is, the setup is, we ended up after a long process with 3 tiers, each with a different footprint, each with a different number of stories, and then the art of mapping where these things happen. I'll be back.
Yeah, so as Tim mentioned, you kind of end up with these. All right. Yeah, so as Tim mentioned, we ended up with 3 kind of levels of density or sizes of buildings. But then the next step is mapping where those go. So we took basically two things into consideration while doing that. The first is kind of like the look and feel of the existing place. This is looking at Newtonville. So kind of like just zooming around on Google Earth and seeing, or in person, just looking at like what's around and what feels contextual. And then also looking at the existing zoning and how the existing zoning parameters and height guidelines might relate to the zones that we're introducing. So then with kind of a design eye, we're basically drawing red being the densest zone drawn here. That's, you can see, concentrated in kind of the more downtown areas, which then becomes VC1, or as it was renamed, MRT, as it gets closer and farther into the like more neighborhood fabric. And then looking at Newton, which has obviously many village centers, you can see how different transects or different like tiers of buildings are distributed across the various village centers. And in some kind of village centers, only the less dense transects or tiers of buildings are used. Like in Auburndale, there's no 4.5-story buildings, only using those kind of lower levels of density and lower tiers of buildings. That's all from me. I'll hand it over.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Camille. So looking back at how Newton zoning was going through the approval process prior to the VCOD, zoning and development took a very long time to get approved, and there's a reason for it. And it all has to do with the process. And Newton was, and I think still is in many aspects, a special permit community. And part of that has to do with the fact that there were not standards that were ingrained within the by right purview of the process. And so a lot of the projects then were really going through special permit, and these processes were privileging reviews that were tied to building size thresholds. So buildings were taking a long time, and I think developers learned to become very patient with the process, but it meant not as many projects were coming through the pipeline. And so in response to that, something we were thinking through with the VCOD development is, if we were able to take design standards and make them a part of the by right process, hopefully we'll start to see more development come through, because your process will be more streamlined. You don't have to go through, extra rounds of review with a planning board or council committee. And so we also changed the process so that instead of tying the thresholds to building size, we're now tying them to lot size. And we thought that this made sense for a lot of reasons. One is to make sure that lots that are, say, under 15,000 square feet, which there are many lots in Newton that are around that size, we felt it was, a good middle ground where the issues of circulation, access, safety, et cetera, are not maybe as important as they are when you get to larger size thresholds. So for example, lots between 15,000 and 30,000 square feet, we thought was a more comfortable threshold where maybe having site plan review would be more desirable and applicable. So that's where site plan review comes in our new process, as well as for MRT projects where they're doing adaptive reuse and doing multiple buildings on a lot. We do still have special permits, of course, with the village center zoning, but that's really more geared for the MRT districts, so the smaller districts having multiple buildings on a lot for new construction, and for the extra large 30,000+ square feet lots in the VC2 and VC3 districts. So we're really happy to see that so far there's been some good progress. The VCOD has been in place a year and a half or so, and already this is information that we got online from the VCOD tracker website, so I encourage you all to check it out. But according to this, since April, there are around 143 units in the pipeline. There are 18 projects in the works, of which 10 of them are adaptive reuse. So to us, that's super encouraging to see. So as part of our initial studies, as part of the long 3-year process that we spent developing the VCOD zoning with the Newton planning staff and ZAP Council, we really looked a lot at studying the potential for what could it feel like if you were to, really put on your developer hat and think long term, thinking about what are the types of properties that are likely to be soft or turnover for development. And so this is just an example of what we studied on Walnut Street in Newtonville, trying to think through what would it feel like to have a VC3 building next to a VC2 building next to MRT development that happens organically down the street. And so I'm bringing this up because, and you're now already familiar with this image, we're already starting to see development come through that is proving how our zoning is working, and it's kind of fascinating to be on the other side and seeing the design standards at work. So as Tim mentioned, this is actually a project that we're doing in-house, which is really awesome to be able to have developed the zoning ourselves and now be thinking through as architects how to apply it on the ground. So this is a fully affordable, light-tech financed project. As Tim mentioned before, the market is doing a lot of weird things right now, but thankfully affordable housing is still in the middle of the type of work that can go on during this time. And so in this instance, we're able to see, this project is taking advantage of the affordable housing bonus, so it's getting increased height. You can see how it's responding to our zoning rules and breaking up the facade. In this instance, the facade needs to be broken up every 80 feet. So you're seeing how that division is taking place. Some other things at work here are a recessed principal entrance, a standard for how tall the ground story needs to be because there's some retail use there. And then there's that flat upper story, half-story setback. The other thing I want to talk about, though, is the MRT district. And this is a district that we see a lot of interest in, certainly now that the VCOD has been in play for a little while. What's great about this district is that it's kind of acting as a nice transition zone between some of the larger 3.5, 4.5 story buildings in VC2, VC3, and the surrounding kind of lower scale residential fabric. And so really the goal behind this district was to be able to facilitate more of that missing middle, small scale type of multifamily buildings, but in a way that's still very contextual with the development around it. And then a secondary, but just as important goal is to be able to think about how we can preserve existing homes through adaptive conversion. And so the diagram that we have on the screen is actually something that is directly from the zoning. We put together standards for where an addition could be placed relative to the front facade and how, basically how we can go about preserving the form of the existing building. And so this district allows for 2 development options. One, with the new construction, we have, same standards around setbacks, height. We have a smaller footprint of 1,500 square feet, and we have a maximum number of units capped at 4. We were thinking, though, about how can we make adaptive reuse multifamily conversion attractive. And so we set a couple different standards in this pathway where, as I mentioned, a new addition needs to be set back 20 feet in this instance from the front facade of the existing home. It still has the same height, but an important bonus that we're allowing for is an expanded footprint. So you can have an additional 50% of building area in your footprint. And importantly, you can have more units. And so we understood, certainly at the time that we were writing this zoning, that converting existing homes, especially older homes, is going to pose a few challenges. And I think there's just certain things that builders are going to have to get used to as they get familiar with this process. Some challenges are related to building code, just understanding how each unit has access and egress, being able to add in additional plumbing chases, soundproofing between new units and older homes, and utility metering is another part of it. But again, we think with the conversion, it can be incentivized because you've got the expanded footprint, you're allowing more units, and you don't have to go through special permit. You can have multiple buildings on a lot, go through site plan review. And so what we're excited to see now is that actually MRT, of all of the different zoning districts, is the one that is seeing the most development interest so far. And it's working more or less the way we intended it to. So these are just some examples that I pulled from the VCOD tracker. You can see that they are combining adaptive reuse. So they're preserving an original structure. Typically, these are structures that are in the front of the lot. And in this instance, I guess these lots are deep enough that they're able to provide new construction toward the rear of the site. But you can see that these are looking pretty contextual. They look pretty good. They're still keeping the existing home, but they're adding more units to it. So in all of these instances, they're developing up to 6 units, but doing it in a really contextual way. And so we know that the topic of how do we preserve homes and how do we avoid tear downs is always evergreen in Newton, and something certainly to think about. And it's something that we've spent a lot of thought about as well, and many a late evening in Newton. While we can't promise that the new zoning can do away with tear downs entirely, we are encouraged to see that the zoning incentive in the MRT pathway is attractive, and we're certainly really pleased to see the developer proposals that are coming through with it. So just as an example, the lower left of the screen is, I think, an example kind of tear down that you might see in a single residence district where a Cape house or a ranch house is being replaced by something 2 times the size and certainly much larger. With the example on the right, you can see a pathway where we can keep an existing structure, allow for additional units, and allow for new construction to be done in a contextually sensitive way. So I'm going to pass it back to Tim to talk through some takeaways.
Just one point about this, because the MRT zoning has been very successful at preserving the big, nicer homes near the village centers, which back in the 50s, 60s became funeral parlors. You know the kind of house I'm talking about. And I think the answer is you get out. The answer when you get out to the residential neighborhoods is the market is always going to replace a house, especially given the home values and the land values in Newton. So I think the only solution to preserve most of the existing housing stock is to do a version of the MRT across the entire city. And it might be, I'm making this up now, but it might be, yes, you can tear down a home and build a McMansion, or you could keep the existing home and you can build 2 units there with some of the same ingredients we have in the MRT zone. I think that's the only way you're going to overcome the inevitability of tear downs. Probably we were working on an anti-tear down formula with ZAP before the world changed politically in Newton. So we never were able to execute that, but we're always happy to revive that. So I wanted to editorialize a little bit on the tear down question, which is something that I know your group is interested in. Who are we to judge? But we think the zoning's working. And I think we have to be patient because the market is so soft now for larger multifamily market rate projects. None of it's happening anywhere in the greater Boston area right now. Everything's on hold between interest rates, tariffs, and now the wait and see about the rent control initiative. So all of our market rate projects are on hold, period, at our office right now. I think the MRT, a lot of communities are interested in the MRT ingredients in a lot of places that we're working now. And I think that politically, the size of the lots where different processes kick in is the best we could hope for politically in Newton, which is lots that are 15,000 square feet or smaller are just administrative review. That's the easy pass. 15 to 30,000 square foot lots are a site plan review with the planning board, and Amy Dane is here to assure us that that's a simple, logical process. And then above 30,000 square feet, it's the same old, but maybe it's okay because that's almost an acre. Those get to be pretty big lots where there are lots of decisions to make about curb cuts and, which side of the lot the building mass should be on. So I think from a design standpoint, a little bit more friction there isn't such a terrible thing. Now, could that be a higher threshold? Probably. Like we're talking about 2 acres in one community where we're working now. But I think those different review processes are as important as the ingredients themselves. We also think that reduce the penthouse setback to 7 feet, but that's a little detail. Now, I wanted to end by making a couple of comments. One is that zoning is really, we think, mostly a design question. And unfortunately, not enough design thinking is part of the discourse around zoning. And the way I like to think about it is that writing zoning is a kind of game theory question, which is we're setting up a rule set that others have to design to. And we want that to be flexible enough that the creative design community can apply their own ingenuity to the rules, but we want the rules to be constrained enough that when projects are aggregated, they add up to a coherent idea about the built environment as a neighborhood or as a village center. And the problem now is that developers, if left to their own devices, will build the biggest buildings possible, because then you are harvesting as much value and profit as possible from 2 egress stairs and 2 elevators. And so the only way to create more walkable communities is to try to constrain that. And so that's a whole different discussion. So this is the timeline of the util zoning learning curve. Our very first zoning experiment was in Littleton, Massachusetts. We've been doing design standards, but the village center zoning we did for the city, because of the long process and because of the very smart planning staff, because of the dedication of the people on ZAP, whether they were for or against what we were doing, meant that we were able to develop a whole framework, a consistent framework that is this kind of new model, which we've been using quite successfully in Burlington, Vermont. We used the Newton model to revamp their entire R district code. We used a version of it for model zoning bylaws for the Cape Cod Commission. Some resistance there. In Harvard, we used the model, a version of it in Watertown to meet their MBA communities requirements. I mentioned Belmont before. In P-Town, in Orleans recently, Lauren and I did a kind of, because those lots are huge, they're former motels, it's a kind of more sophisticated recipe. And there's more and more interest. We've just started writing the model zoning code for the state of Vermont, following the Newton model, and if with the same tier system. And if municipalities adopt it, they're exempt from the state's complicated environmental requirements. So municipalities are incentivized to do it. So that's a little bit the context of what we worked out with all of you and where it's headed. This is the draft of the Vermont statewide code. Maximum footprint, number of stories, based on, especially in the cuter, smaller towns, the kind of buildings that are there. But it's ripped right from the Newton playbook. And so this is an ongoing process, which is very exciting. So I think with that, we can answer questions. Do you want to field them?
Yes.
Okay. We'll be ready.
Yeah, you guys can hang out up here if you want. Thanks for our presenters. That was great. A lot of you guys have been here before. Rule number 1, got to ask a question. No comments, just questions. Rule number 2, please limit your question to 30 seconds so we can move along and get questions from lots of people. Rule number 3, there's people on the Zoom. You can put your questions in the chat, and Josh, who's sitting right there, is gonna read it. We'll all go back and forth to Josh, and we'll get those questions mixed in with questions here in the room, and that's the plan. We'll start right here.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thanks, folks. A question about the MRT zoning concept. It's great. And something, I'm from Brookline. We'd like to solve some of the same problems that Newton has. There's a state rule. I don't know the exact name of it. It's something like unity or unification. The basic rule is that you can't discriminate in your zoning between new and existing. And if you're familiar with that rule, I'm scratching my head. How can MRT be made to work that doesn't run afoul of that rule?
Oh, it's on. Because there are 2 routes that you could take. Because you can either tear it down and build new, or you can pick it, it's not considered biased. Does that make sense? I mean, there's 2 routes, and so somebody can't claim that it's not fair because you can choose both avenues. If the law was in this zone, you can only keep buildings or not, but because there's 2 routes, the legal people that have looked at it don't think it's an issue. But we'd have to get the zoning attorney we work with to get into any detail. Please, lawyers, go easy on us. We get the basics, but it's a good question. Does that sort of answer your question? You're allowed to. It's a little bit like the bonus, that you get an extra floor. It's the same rule set as allowing people building affordable housing to get an extra floor. It's part. You can, if you provide options and you weight the options as a bonus, you're allowed to do that within the rules. Consider it a bonus, like the extra floor for affordable housing.
Hi. So as I understand it, you've created a new zoning format. What happened to the existing zoning format? Was it replaced? Was it removed? Or does this work? I mean, is it all still on the books?
It's on the books. This is an overlay. So the underlying zoning can be a choice too. We're working in Cleveland on a form-based zoning code, believe it or not, for a new industrial district. We'll do anything. And that, we said it should just make it an overlay. And then the city of Cleveland planners are like, no, we're going to replace the zoning here. The complication with embedding the zoning within the existing zoning code is all of the definitions and all of it's the same kind of legal question, is a much more expensive overhaul, because you've got to work that all the way through every nook and cranny of the zoning code. And an overlay, in a way, is a parallel system. And once you choose the overlay, it can live in its own little world. But if you replace the zoning that was there, it would be much more complicated. And so it's a cost issue. It's a political brain damage question. It also protects from claims of devaluation, right? So like, it's a taking. The new zoning, I'm not getting what I could get before. And it's like, no, you use the old zoning then. Like, so there's many reasons why it's a choice in a lot of communities where we work. Was Orleans a replacement or an over? That's an overlay too. Orleans, Massachusetts, which is our most recent one, adopted like a month ago, is also an overlay for the same reasons. It's a great question though. No, it's just south of the Cleveland Foundation. There's a defunct 1920s, 30s industrial district that is a big economic development area. There's a new redevelopment authority, and they want to bring industrial businesses right into the city for jobs. But if you want to talk about Cleveland, we can do that after.
We have a lot of questions from the folks on Zoom, so. I'll start from the top. Seems like all the housing going up looks the same. To what extent is that because of zoning and other policies, and to what extent is it economics? Are there zoning or other changes that could lead to more diverse housing?
The short answer is a race to the bottom, making the cost of development as inexpensive as possible while still being able to sell or rent the units. And so the market is a one enormous intelligent organism that knows exactly which cladding, window systems, and foundation system is the cheapest. And since it's sold on the last project, the market is value engineering as we sleep. And I think we're almost at the end game where we're at a point of zero, whatever, and architects are very frustrated by it. But zoning is not the answer. We've been toying with stuff like if you do a full masonry facade of real dimensional bricks, you get another floor. I guess you could do that. Ann Houston likes that. Yeah. So you could, but it's very hard within zoning. Should really just be about dimensional standards, not qualitative issues, because you get into all kinds of discretionary stuff. Like the market will soon figure out how to make a brick that meets the zoning code in letter only that isn't the brick we like or something. So the answer is, I think there is no answer, and it's very frustrating.
I'll ask one more before passing it on. Are we seeing an uptick in new starts? I assume new starts in Newton after the new zoning.
Yes.
Great.
So there was an editorial in the Times, it may have gotten into the Globe as well recently, that was coming out very strongly in favor of, I guess, a ballot question that's going to be in the next election that would require towns to allow people to create lot sizes carve up lots into 5,000 square foot lots. Newton was actually singled out there as being one of the places where that should happen, and where the lot size restrictions actually getting in the way of affordable housing. And I'm first of all curious to know what the experts in the room think about that, and secondly, how that ballot question might or might not impact the work that you guys have already put in place here.
Well, de facto, you can do that with our zoning because you're allowed to have multiple structures on a lot. And so the reason to subdivide is to get more houses or more duplexes. You can do that under our zoning code. We don't restrict the number, because if you think about it, if you're fixing the maximum building footprint, you don't want to penalize big lots in a district versus small ones because you have to use this little monopoly house. You just can use more of those. So our zoning and code allows for multiple structures and sets how far apart they have to be. And so, and then that avoids the need to subdivide before you have multiple structures. So it actually streamlines what the state law is going to allow. So I think the state law, the zoning that we did is already pre-wired to work with it. But I think, minimum lot sizes is one of the primary tools that municipalities that don't want new development use to keep new development from coming. 2-acre lots. And a lot of the work that we do as planners, one of our recommendations always is to reduce or eliminate the minimum lot size. Reduce or eliminate the minimum lot size because the market's going to figure it out. I mean, if there's still setbacks in place, I mean, think about the older neighborhoods in Newton where there's a 10, 15-foot setback on either side. There's a 15-foot front setback and there's a 30-foot rear yard. There's lots of places in Newton like that. The setback should control that, not minimum lot size, we think. If you think about, like, again, zoning is fun. It's like a game. And so what game are we designing to get the build outcomes we want? I think it's good. Yeah. Let it rip. Right? Amy, are you for it? She spoke here before. I always ask her first. Across the whole city, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here you go.
Okay. Yeah, just that I was saying the VCOD zoning and MRT is on a small amount of land area in the city. So this state law, if it passed through the ballot, would cover the entire city and not just the small areas that we've just rezoned. But I think the bigger constraint on what how much it would apply to is the frontage requirement. So there are lots of lots that are bigger than 5,000 square feet, multiples of that in theory could be divided up into smaller lots, but you also need a significant amount of frontage, which is the stretch of the parcel that goes on the public way. So a lot of lots, if you have a deep lot that just has a short frontage, you might not be able to subdivide that under this new law.
Yeah, I think, but this is a really important question because the problem with, like, I live in South Boston, there's lots of front back houses when, the 1920s, just to put another triple decker in the backyard, there's a little walkway to get to it, is that it's the fire chiefs that are keeping that from happening. It was a big problem in Burlington where there was a lot of support for front back subdivision with just a walkway to get to the back dwelling, but the fire chief put a kibosh on it because of fire access. And so in Newton, if you have an ADU that's more than 50 feet from the front lot line, it's got to be sprinklered, and suddenly that's a really expensive ADU, for example, or a second structure. So there's these other fire access rules that aren't considered often with zoning, that fire chiefs have their own discretionary decision-making power that is hard to nail down sometimes. I'm sure you have a great fire chief here, but I'm just...
We're going to do a single stair talk one of these days.
Oh, yeah, that's me.
And we're going to, you can come back.
I wrote the report.
Well, we'll ask, and then we'll see if you can come back and talk about the way the fire code affects the built environment, actually profound effects. But yeah, one more from the Zoom.
I think this question is related. I don't think it's the same question. They asked, am I right to worry that the current legalized starter homes ballot initiative could undermine Newton's VCOD for lots of 10,000 square feet or more? The VCOD encourages smallish multifamily buildings on many such lots. In contrast, a starter homes rule might encourage subdividing these lots into several 5,000 square foot single family house lots. In Newton, units in multifamily buildings are more affordable, or at least less unaffordable, than even the smallest single-family detached house. I think
It's a good question, though.
it's a good question. I think Amy
You know
might
what?
have answered part of that.
There might have to be an emergency measure that there's a minimum footprint in some of the districts. But it's a thought. Would we get 5 McMansions? I think any lot in Newton doesn't have enough frontage to do that. I think what's good about this is where MRT isn't. This might keep McMansions from happening, where you might get a second house instead. So I was in the framework of the questions about MRT. I think this will be good for Newton because we did a whole McMansion photo essay as part of that work we were doing that was stopped to figure out what developers prefer to do. What a developer prefers to do when they build a McMansion is tear down the existing house and have as much of the house face the front as possible so it looks impressive. So it's like a Potemkin village of mansionness. And they run the I don't want to offend anybody who lives in one of these, but they run the front of the house as far as it can left to right to the side setback so it looks impressive. And there's still the big backyards in the back. And I think where the McMansions happen is the wider frontage, where it might make more sense to build a second house or to tear down both and get a more medium-sized house. That's where I think the market might go with this. But I haven't. This is really we're workshopping now. I like this.
Okay. Got 2 quick ones. In the MRT zone, I assume the conversion from single families to multi-units on the same lot results in condos, since the lots themselves are not subdivided. Correct?
It can be rental too.
Okay. And the other question, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but if any of the other experts in the room do, are there any more plans for affordable senior housing in Newton?
That's not for me to answer.
Yeah. Looking for Deb.
Somebody said just nodding yes.
Well, I know that Newton Housing Authority is in the process of looking at redeveloping one of their senior sites. Most of the affordable housing that's in the pipeline, and we have the best pipeline we've had in a long time, is coming by right VCOD. We've got 3 projects. You know about
Okay.
2 of them, and we have 1 other that are in active pipeline right now, and then we have 3 other projects that are coming. So it's a good time for affordable housing. And I won't ask my question because we're out of time. Well, I just want I have seen this is working really effectively at producing affordable housing, and I'm hearing from developers that Newton is no longer the place to avoid, like the plague. But I'm, excuse me, I have a laryngitis. But I'm wondering if it is also encouraging some of the middle market housing, because I'm not convinced that these small lot houses. We have a 4,500 square foot lot. Our house would go for $1.5 million. I'm not sure that that's going to happen in Newton. So I'm just wondering, is this going to produce that sort of middle market housing or not?
I think in the village centers it will, because I think the village center zoning is ripe for when the market resets for market rate condos, but they'll be attainable only because they'll be smaller than a big house. And so I think it's going to create housing stock that there isn't much of in Newton. So this is a big discussion. We're not the consultant in Cambridge, but they keep asking me to speak in the council things they're having, which is most of the city councilors in Cambridge are happy with market rate condos that a professional family with a young child or 2 can live in, but within a condo, and that's what's missing in Cambridge. And so I think the village center zoning is going to be popular for condominium projects when that starts to make sense again, when the interest rates come down. And in fact, when we were doing the work, there were a couple of condo projects in the pipeline, and we talked to some condo developers, and then all of that just stopped because of interest rates and tariffs and construction costs. So I think they'll be attainable only because they'll be small, well-designed units for people that want to live in Newton, or for empty nesters, or all of that.
Somebody asked, what specifically should the city be doing to encourage reuse and avoid teardowns? Beyond banning teardowns, are there positive changes that will make them more profitable for owners?
Let a second building be built on the lots. I think it's the only answer, because the real estate market is, I think if you ban them, prices are still going to escalate. I think to increase supply, you liberally allow a second dwelling on the lot and up to 3 units. Okay, I would say allow 3 dwelling units per lot across the entire city and allow a second structure. And then you'll see very few McMansions happen. But I think other than that, I think it's very hard to stop capitalism. You have to steer it. So it's funny because I just left Northeastern. I'm at Harvard, and I have a joint appointment in the planning and real estate programs. And I have 2 very different audiences for that. For the planning students, I'm like, our job is to stop capitalism from, you have to know how it works so that we can either skim from the top, or we can keep it from doing what it wants to do. And the real estate students is, your job is to make as much money as possible. But it's the same system, And even in the nonprofit world, by the way, I'm looking at yeah. I'm only here as a commentator. I can't become a rogue consultant.
We'll write up.
No,
we'll write up the notes from this and have the suggestions. And we have a policy program already here at Newton for Everyone that addresses some of these ideas, like expanding the MRT. We thought that was a good idea even before Tim said it tonight, but we still think it's a good idea after hearing it. Oh, the abbreviations.
Oh, the abbreviations.
We can put that on the website too. That's a good idea. We'll put it on the website.
Thank you. Tim, my question, are you ready? Okay, you're looking quizzically. It has to do with the economic incentives that you built in particular to the MRT district, and hoping that you can expound on those. But in the context of, I understand there's a couple of counselors, normally on the more conservative housing development side, who have proposed doing partly what you just said, expanding the MRT district or something like it throughout the city. I think that's a great idea, except they're calling it MRT light, and they wouldn't allow as much development to the rear of the house. They wouldn't allow as big an enlargement of the footprint, and some other things. Setbacks are different and so forth. Can you expound a bit on 2.5 years ago when we passed this, where your head was at? And I know, we worked with your economic analysts, and, where were we then? And if you can, where are we now? And should MRT be changed at all to expand it across the city, or are we good?
I'm going to have Lauren mostly answer this, but I think it's risky to make up policy with zoning without drawing through physically what the consequences might be. You can't just, you have to draw alternative scenarios and see what it looks like. So, I'll pass the rest of the question over to Lauren.
Thanks, Tim. I mean, I think, I don't know. I mean, I think we're certainly encouraged to see the way that the MRT is being interpreted with new development proposals. And I mean, at its core, it's about being a district that can transition smaller scale multifamily housing next to your single family residence districts. And I think it's something, it's providing a gentle density that we think works still. I think the economic side of it, though, is something that, I mean, before we would say apply it everywhere, I think we would want to understand with today's numbers, what does that mean? Do we have confidence that that could work? But I think from an urban form point of view, which is always going to be our lens, we think why not allow this to happen? Because we think they're gentle neighbors. You're still providing a pathway to keep what is there should that be desired. And in every case, as every home is different. Sometimes there's a strong argument for keeping something and sometimes there isn't. But to at least allow that flexibility in the zoning, that two-part pathway we think is really nice to have and I think has real merit.
A quicker way to do it would be to either allow an addition or a whole new structure, but another single family structure. And I think that would avoid the complication of what's at risk, because it would be totally fine to have a more contemporary house next to an older house on bigger lots. That's how most neighborhoods were built out. There were larger farmhouses, and then if you look at the styles of houses, you can always tell which ones were first and how far apart they are. Even in the very dense block I live in South Boston, there's 4 original houses. There's houses between those and triple deckers that crowded in between those. It's like an archaeological site, and I think like just allowing a second single family house on a lot, I think would tamp down a lot of the McMansions, because that's going to be worth more, I think, in Newton. Two medium-sized houses is worth more than one McMansion, I suspect, but we'd have to play that out. Don't you think? Yeah.
Building in Newton seems to take a really long time. How much of that is driven by local policy and regulation? Would we see more diverse housing if the process were faster and easier?
Yes.
Hi, I'm David Rockwell with the Newton Fair and Affordable Housing Partnership. I would love to get the number of number of projects have done under VCOD. That wonderful slide. I forgot to write it down. Was that 145 or something like that? And I wondered if you could break that down across the VC3, VC2, and MRT experiences. I'm sorry, 18 projects. I know I was off base. Yeah, do you know the breakdown?
Thank you. So I'm going off of what I remember. I don't quite have it firmly in my head, but I want to say that almost 10 of these projects might have been MRT or more. So MRT is definitely taking the lion's share now of development interest.
So my question on that is, have we had any experience yet where a developer who could use MRT opted not to and went with the underlying zoning after all?
A great question. I wish we had a member of planning staff here to answer it.
That's a really good question. I don't think so. Yeah. But it's a really good question.
Gotcha.
Thank you. This is the first time I come to one of these meetings, so maybe I completely not understanding this. But the MRT is not, I think what you were saying is not city-wide applicable. So where areas are those?
They're a way to think about it is the village centers in Newton. We rezoned, I think, 10 or 11 of them. 6 total, right? at the end of the
We
day.
started more ambitious citywide
Yeah.
and ultimately it got narrowed down to 6.
To 6, okay, 6. So
But everywhere you see green on this map is where the MRT district has been applied.
they're close to the village centers. They're not
Yep.
across
And
the
what
whole
are,
city.
what are the diameters of that, of the
So these
Areas.
are 2 quarter-mile and half-mile radii from the T stops.
and that would apply for the MRT?
Not
Quarter mile,
exactly a
half a mile.
quarter mile, but a kind of. They're hard to see.
The rezoning applies specifically to the red, blue, and green parcels, and there are different rules that apply to the red parcels, the blue parcels, and the green parcels. And then the circles are just showing the distance from the T stops, but the properties within that distance of a quarter mile and a half mile aren't, the new zoning doesn't apply there unless it's green, red, or blue.
Right.
Or blue.
Yeah, there is a negotiation with the council about how much to rezone, and the MBT communities law was both the impetus to do this, but the trap that we couldn't do too much because they didn't want to rezone any more number of units hypothetically than the minimum required for Newton to meet the law. And so we had a more expansive map, and it got reduced for those that were veterans of the process.
Somebody wrote, you mentioned that only special permits are now required for larger projects. Have we seen a decrease in the percentage of projects that need city council approval?
Well, this is the rules that we're talking about only apply to the limited areas that are colored there. But I imagine there's stuff going on, like on Route 9 and stuff that's still the old way of doing business. So, but also the market's so soft right now. I don't know very much stuff is going through the council right now. Do you know, Amy? Even in Boston, very few stuff is coming in front of the Boston Civic Design Commission. They suddenly don't have much to review either because the real estate market is very soft now. The real estate market's at kind of point as like it was after the financial crisis of 2008. It's very soft right now.
I can add to that a little bit. There's very little, it seems, going before the Land Use Committee for special permits in the last couple of years. Now that the city of Newton is not in what is badly named safe harbor, projects are coming to the Zoning Board of Appeals, not to the larger projects, not to the City Council. That'll turn around when we get back over that number.
The other thing I just say on that question is the all affordable. A good example of something that didn't have to go in front of the city council is that unit or the project at 793 Washington, 56 units there coming in without having to go through this long city council process. That saves money. And for an affordable development, you can think of that money, I think, as turning into more units. Like you get more or house more people by having that process run faster.
Last question. Somebody wrote, I think a city councilor proposed new rules that would allow turning single-family homes into multifamily homes as long as the front of the existing house was retained. Does that fall into the new zoning, or will city council need to change zoning again?
There's been a lot of discussion in the R districts about reform to allow more units, and I think that must be part of that discussion that's going on. I mean, but that is sort of true of the MRT district, where the addition you put on the existing structure has to be 20 feet back from the front face so that you're not glomming a new thing on the front. The whole point of saving these structures is that they define the character of the street they're on. So we haven't been tracking the recent conversations about zoning with the ZAP meeting, so it's very possible. There's one more question. Yeah, one more. She was very.
Is she going to ask a question? We're going to find out.
And this is not really Newton specific, but it's to you as a professional. Um, to what extent, when you're dealing with zoning, do you think about people and the people who are going to be living in these units that are being built?
I think that's our primary goal, which is, let me put it this way, that the only residential buildings the market is delivering right now are big 6-story apartment buildings, 5 stories of wood frame construction over a steel or concrete ground floor that is maybe the amenity spaces, maybe some retail and parking under that. And then there's a weird amenity deck on top with Adirondack chairs and a fire pit. You know what I'm talking about? And that can't be the only choice about where to live moving forward, that and single family houses. And so what's really at stake here is making sure that a much wider bandwidth of housing stock is built. I'd much rather live in a 6-unit building than a 220-unit building, for example. And so, for example, in Massachusetts, it's much more economical to build a 3-story, 12-unit building because you only need 1 stairway and an elevator. You don't need 2 stairways. And because the code only allows you to have 4 units on a floor, it means that every unit on a floor has 2 exposures. Every unit's a corner unit. That's a much better unit than being in a corridor building where you come in and all of your windows face one direction and everything's kind of squished. And at the back of the unit, at the very back, is a kitchen that you look from across your dining area, across your living area, out your single exposure. A cat is much happier when you have a window that has 2 exposures. So yes, it's all about people. Like, we need to use the zoning code and the building code to get many more different kinds of buildings, multifamily buildings built. But right now the market's only building one kind. And so that's about people. You don't believe me, but that's okay. We'll next time.
Hi, my name's Josh. I'm actually going to school for urban planning in the fall at Tufts. So my question is, well, first kind of like a comment, like, it seems like we spent a lot of time and effort, and thank you very much for putting, and all that, doing the, VCOD redesign, right? And ultimately got kind of neutered. And I feel like, we're not going to see the housing abundance that, we really need to bring down prices for families from it. So, we talk a lot about policy here, but what do you think is the political path to housing abundance, right? Because we have so many like intelligent people here and in the state, in Newton, right? We already know what the answers are, but we need to be able to, I feel like we need to be able to somehow get to a political path to enacting these policies to get housing abundance.
Yeah, I think the problem is that so much of housing production has to do with market conditions, economics, the cost of land, the cost of building materials, the amount of money people are willing to pay for rent, the amount of money people are willing to pay for a condominium or a house. And so I think the only tools we have is zoning, but not overzoning. If you overzone, land values go up and nothing happens. The mistake is to say, the brokers whisper to the owner that the land's worth more than is reasonable, and then nothing transacts. So you've got to get the zoning right for the market. If you say, let's just let everything 12 stories, 8 FAR, who cares, is that it locks up land because the perceived value is higher than its actual market value. So that's one issue. The other is the building code we've discovered is a bigger problem than the zoning code. The Massachusetts building code requiring 2 egress stairs. Once you have 2 egress stairs, you've got to justify them by having enough real estate. Those fire stairs have to be a certain distance apart, which means you already have a corridor building. And then the underwriting for financing a project all comes down to the net to gross ratio, which is that the way that profits are maximized is you have as little shared circulation as possible, as far from windows as possible, to harvest as much sellable or rentable real estate as possible. And that's why why every apartment building you've been in is the result of efficiency metrics. So the problem, I think, more has to do with the complicit relationship between the people who write building codes and the people who decide whether to finance a project or not. That's at the heart of where housing production is actually being decided. I don't think zoning is the biggest problem.
What about, like, sorry, but in like Lexington and Cambridge, we're seeing a lot of action. Do you think that like their zoning like allows for projects to be like more economical?
Cambridge isn't seeing any more action than you are. They're more angry about it than you are, but their zoning card isn't as smart. They're mad because they passed a very permissive zoning code, and what developer and raised their inclusionary threshold to 11 units. And so what the market's figured out is we're going to do a 10-unit condo building. We're going to fill the entire site with a solid block of 4-storyness, and then we're going to carve in from the front to get 9 parking spaces because we want them to be condos. So the outcome is like bad. And it's raising land values because now every lot is worth 9 condo units. And so what's happened is that it's totally frozen the market. For the rental doesn't work anymore for that small stuff because the land values are riding on this this hypothetical condo project. So land values are also misunderstood. The way that zoning affects land values is not understood well enough by planners. So okay.
That's all.
That's all. It's over.
Well, almost, but yeah, the questions are over. Thanks, as usual. Great questions. Yeah, I think some of the stuff Tim was saying about us as a community designing the rules that we want developers to play by. Like, we live in a capitalist country, in a capitalist system. The City Council of Newton, we've had at least one socialist recently on there, and the economic system of the United States of America is not within their scope to change. What we can as voters and as a community hold them accountable for is saying, given that reality, what are the rules that those people play by in your community? I think we've heard, again, a lot of great ideas tonight and thoughts on how to design those rules to have them play the game in a productive way. I got 2 little girls. Sometimes they're playing the game in a certain way, and the way they're playing means that people are going to get left out. People are going to get their feelings hurt. I'm going to have to stop washing the dishes and go upstairs and mediate. Sometimes the rules are better and everyone can have fun, an older kid, a younger kid. And I think maybe we as a community in Newton can reflect on some of this advice and these ideas and build that, design those rules so that the game that gets played and the housing that gets built serves everyone as I think as a community is what we ultimately want to do. So I want to thank Tim, Lauren, and Camille from Util. You guys have been great. Thank you so much. Congregation, George Tzedek for hosting us as always. Dennis for doing the AV and the streaming. If you want to tell your friends about all the cool stuff you learned tonight, the new acronyms you might have picked up, you can sign up outside to hang out with us at the booth at Juneteenth in Newton Highlands. If you want to get involved, you can sign up out there also. If you want to eat pizza and drink some beverages and hang out with your fellow housing advocates, July 14th is going to be the summer social right here in West Newton. And you can come to that. You'll get an email about that in the next couple of days. So yeah, we'd love to see you again. Thanks for coming. Have a good night.